Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. So, today I am going to be looking at the inventory valuation methods. They form part of the first part of Learning Unit 5. And I'm going to take you through example 5.1, where it is looking at both of the inventory valuation methods that we will be using for the purpose of this module. And we're looking at whether it is under a perpetual inventory system or a periodic inventory system. So I'm just going to give you a bit of background before we actually start off with the example. So as I said, this is the first part of Learning Unit 5. Now, Learning Unit 5 is quite a big section. There's a couple of sections within the actual learning unit itself. I think it's about 4 to 5 sections in total, and it's broken up into different questions that can be asked based on this learning unit. You'll see that your assignment 2 has one of the questions, which is question 1 in the assignment, and I did a quick recording of an example of that for you. That's one type of question that you can expect. Then the other is what you're looking at the moment, your inventory valuation methods. Then we also have the economic ordering quantity, we have the predetermined allocation of overheads, and we also have your ABC and traditional costing methods. So each of them are examinable naturally, and you will find that I will be uploading recordings or doing a live collab on each of the sections. So far, I've already done question 5.11, which is assignment 2, question 1. So that is one of the sections under Learning Unit 5. And then today I am working with your inventory valuation methods. So here, as I said, just a bit of background with your inventory valuation methods. This is literal to the word inventory valuation. It's looking at how do we value the level of our inventory? What's the worth of our inventory? So, a lot of you might have come across this in your daily work where you need to determine the value of your inventory at the end of a particular month. Stock takes need to be done, that type of thing. So, we're looking at the FIFO method, first in, first out, and then the weighted average method. We look at these in particular because these are the two most common systems that are used in South Africa. So for the purpose of this module, we only work with those two. So FIFO, first in, first out, and then weighted average, literal to the word, is where we'll be calculating a weighted cost to value our inventory at. So with the FIFO, I'll explain it to you in a second how each of them work. With the FIFO and the weighted average, it also does depend on the type of inventory system that the company is following or making use of. So when we had looked at Learning Unit 2, you would have seen, if you've read through your textbook as well, that there are two types of inventory systems. You have a perpetual inventory system as well as a periodic inventory system. So a perpetual inventory system, and I've written it down here as well within this little block. So perpetual inventory system is one where the system, literal to the word perpetual, is continuously updating itself, meaning after every transaction takes place, whether it's a sale, whether it's a purchase of items, the system will be updated. It's generally updated itself. So every time a transaction takes place, the system is automatically updated. So basically, we have a very detailed system. We know exactly what our cost of sales is, what our sales is, what our gross profits are at all times, meaning it's a day by day or transaction by transaction record. So it's very detailed. Then you have a periodic inventory system, which is not day by day or transaction by transaction. You have a periodic inventory system where you find that a specific company follows the method of, instead of updating the system every single time a transaction takes place, they are going to have specific periods, literal to the word periodic. So specific periods may be every end of month or every end of quarter or bi-monthly or whatever it is, just a specific period of time, maybe at the end of every quarter, 6 months, and so on, the company will have a physical stock taking place where they will literally count and make a note of the value of the inventory that they have on hand, what has been sold, what the cost of the goods were that were sold, what the sales were on the items that were sold, and so on. So here it's only taking place on a periodic basis, so not a transaction by transaction. So here a company is only going to be able to identify their sales, their cost of sales, their gross profit, and so on at the end of a particular interval, at the end of a particular period. So this is the difference between the two inventory systems, and they also impact the FIFO and weighted average methods. So we first are going to look at, for the first part of example 5.1, we'll base it on the assumption that the company follows a perpetual inventory system. You'll see that they specifically say that to you here as well. So it says this company, Kendrakis Enterprises, uses the perpetual inventory system for both the FIFO and the weighted average method. And then in the second part of the example, you'll see, I'm just trying to get it loaded. You'll see for the second part of the example, it follows a periodic inventory system. So they say that to you here as well. The enterprise makes use of the periodic inventory system in example 5.2. So two different inventory systems that are being used, which naturally, as I said, will impact your calculations. You do need to look out for that in a typical exam question. It can get tricky because it is quite easy to miss those keywords. So you do have to pay attention to, firstly, are we working with a FIFO or a weighted average inventory model or inventory valuation method? Secondly, is the company making use of a perpetual or a periodic inventory system? So it's important that we clearly identify that because that would impact our calculations naturally as well. So let's get started with example 5.1. And just to recap in terms of FIFO and weighted average, what those two are. So your FIFO method is where, literal to the word FIFO, first in, first out. This is where any inventory that had been purchased first and is now ready to be sold to the customer must go on a first in, first out basis. So anything that was purchased first must be sold first. Anything that was purchased later on would be sold later as well. So whatever came in first will be sold first. So naturally, what happens here is whatever is purchased later on in the company is what would be there at the end of a period, because what is purchased first is sold off as the sales take place. So anything that's purchased later on will naturally still be there at the end of a period, and that's how your FIFO method works. With the weighted average method, instead of working on a first in, first out basis, here you just work with a weighted price or weighted cost to value your inventory. So let's get started with example 5.1. And it says to you here that Kendrakis Enterprises trades in a single homogeneous product. On the 1st of April 2023, there were 5,200 units with a selling price of 3 Rand each. Now, this is important as well. And what I'd like to point out at this stage is that when working with the FIFO and the weighted average methods, it's always going to be cost prices that are used. So whenever you record a purchase of stock or inventory or sale of your inventory, it is always at cost. So in this instance, they said to you 5,200 units were on hand on the 1st of April, but they gave you the selling price of 3 Rand each. Now, we naturally are not going to record them at the 3 Rand because that's the selling price. We need to record them at their cost. So they said to you, this was the selling price after they marked these goods up with 20% on cost. So immediately before even continuing, we would note then that 3 Rand is your selling price. To convert that selling price to a cost price, a general formula that can be used is to determine cost price, take your selling price and multiply it by 100 over 100 plus the markup percentage. So here it would be 3 multiplied by 100 over 100 plus the markup percentage was 20, so 100 plus 20, which is 120. This then would tell us that the cost price is R2.50, and we can now record that as your opening balance because this is what was available as they had indicated on the 1st of April 20.3. So immediately before I even continue with the rest of it, let's look at recording that. So in your table, you'll see that what they ask you to do is, so this is the question, the part that I've put in the squiggly bracket around. It says to you for each of the FIFO and weighted average cost. Sorry, I'm just trying to highlight. So for each of the FIFO and weighted average cost inventory control methods, the following will be determined. They want you to determine the value of your closing inventory on the 30th of April. That's the last day of the month. The sales revenue for the month, the cost of sales for the month, the gross profit. And you're going to do that for the well, we're starting with the FIFO method. So for the FIFO method, you're going to do that in this table. This table pretty much summarizes most of what you'll need. Some of it you do still need to work out of the table, but this table is summarizing most of what you will need. So in the table, you have the column, the first column for the date. Then you have a column for the purchases that were made. So literal to the word, this is anything that was purchased in a particular period. Then you have your issues. So I'm going to write down that your issues is looking at all of the sales that took place, but you are recording it at its cost. So it represents the cost of your sales. So cost of sales is determined from the issues column. Basically, your issues column is the same as saying cost of sales. And then in the last column, you have your balance. So as I said to you at the top where we were reading, the first paragraph said on the 1st of April 20.3, there were 5,200 units with a selling price of R3 each that were on hand. So it's the 1st of April, which means it is your opening balance. So you'll put in under the date, the first, and there's nothing that would go under purchases and issues because nothing is issued or purchased. And immediately into the bank column, you're going to indicate that it was 5,200 units at, sorry, I'm just trying to highlight. So 5,200 units at the R2.50, which I had calculated here at the top. Okay, so that is acknowledging that this is the opening balance, and we also acknowledge that the values in this table are cost prices, not selling prices. Okay, then they said to you, so back to the top, back to the initial paragraph, they said to you, Kendrakis Enterprises uses the perpetual inventory system. So for this example and the top of the next page, you're going to see that here we are working with a perpetual inventory system, which is based on the idea that every time a transaction takes place, the system automatically updates itself. So we know at all times what the value of our sales, our cost of sales, our gross profit, and so on are. So now we have the first item, and then they say to you that this was a whole lot of transactions that had taken place during the month of April. So here, all of these are the transactions that took place. We now need to record them, and we're going to look at answering the questions that they had given us at the bottom here. So let's look at the transactions. As I said to you in the table, the first table is for the first column is for the date. The second column is for anything that is purchased. The third column is cost of sales, meaning when a sale takes place, you're going to record it at its cost. So we need to identify that as well. And then the last column is the balances. Okay, so the first transaction under the date says to you that they had purchased 2,000 units at 2.75 each. So any purchases go into the purchases column. So it'll be 2,000 at 2.75. So you literally will write down 2,000 at 2.75. The date is the 2nd. And then there's nothing that goes under purchases because under issues, because you are purchasing these items. So there wouldn't be anything under issues, and then your balance is then, and this is the interesting part. This is the part that's a little bit different to what you are or what you can expect. So here, sorry, let me just clear the screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here under the heading of balance, you're going to indicate that this is what was already there. 5,200 units at 2.50. This is still in the balance of the company. And then you have that they purchased 2,000 units at 2.75. So the entire 2,200 at 2,000 at 2.75 is what will be in the last column. So you'll indicate what was there already, what remained, the 5,200 at 2.50 each, together with the new items that were purchased. That is now going to be 2,000 at 2.75. So literally just whatever was there already, which is then the opening balance. I'll highlight that for you. So your opening balance was the 5,200 at 2.50. You had purchased this on the 2nd. So on the 2nd, there is still the closing balance that needs to be made. So that was the original 5,200 at 250 that was there. We haven't sold anything off yet. And then now we newly purchased 2,000 at 275. So again, this needs to be noted. So you're going to have the 5,200 at 250 and 2,000 at 2.75. Okay, so the next one then, and again, you can continue in this way. So the next one was at, sorry guys, I was talking there and it just seemed to have gone off. So the next one is that we sold 6,000 units at 5.41. So now when we're selling off items, and I actually had it written here, but I removed it. So cost of sales. And I'm just going to add on that this is when you are selling and this is when you are buying. When you are buying. Let me just rewrite that. Okay, so your purchases is when you are buying, your issues is when you are selling. So again, you have your opening balance together with the items that were purchased, and the initial items were at a cost of 250. That became the first amount that is now available, or that is a balance of your account. And then you have anything that was purchased or sold going into, so if it's purchased, it's going into the purchase column. If you're buying, it's going into the buy or the issue column. So then the next transaction is on the 13th. So they said to you here, oh, sorry, we did the 6th. No, we didn't do the 6th. Okay, so the next transaction is on the 8th. So here on the 8th, you sold 6,000 units at 5 Rand 41. So according to the headings, anything that is sold is going to be recorded in this issues column. So now you need to know, they said to you 6,000 units are sold. So here you will apply the FIFO method where it says to you, if 6,000 units are being sold, we need to sell them off from what was there first. So basically from the from the 5,200 that had been available, we need to sell off from there first. And then whatever we still need, we can go to the next one and take it out from there. So if you look at the balance from the previous page, from the previous balance, you had 5,200 at 2 Rand 50 and 2,000 at 2 Rand 75. So here you are going to look at, to make up the 6,000 units that will be sold, we need to know how we're going to make it up. So we have 5,200 units, and this is at a cost of 2 Rand 50 each. And then to make it up, you still need, so we need 6,000, we have 5,200. So that would mean that we still need 800 units. So now we're going to say that if we use the entire 5,200 at 2 Rand 50, we now need to remove the 800 from what was left. So from the 2,000, we now need to remove 800 units. So if the 5,200 units was at 5 Rand, what was it, 2 Rand 50, the 800 units is now costed at 2 Rand 75. So now we have made up the 6,000, and as you can see, because we are selling these, they're going to go into the issues column. So into the issues column, which records everything that is sold, you will see the 5,200 at 2 Rand 50 and 800 at 2 Rand 75. Oh, sorry. Yes, so the 800 at 2 Rand 75. So here it is here under the issues column. On the 8th, we had sold 5,200 units at 2 Rand 50 and 800 at 2 Rand 75. Now we need to look at what is left over. So we basically have used all of the 5,200, and from the 2,000 we now only had 1,200 available. So from the 2,000 you now used 800. So I'm going to write it here. We used 800. That left us with 1,200 available, and it's at the latest cost of 2.75. So now your closing balance is going to be the 1,200 units at 2 Rand 75. And now we can look at the next transaction. Okay, then they said to you on the 13th. So now on the 13th, and I'm just going to erase some of this so I have enough space. Okay, so now on the 13th, we purchased 1,000 units more at 2 Rand 85. So into the purchases column, you're going to put in on the 13th, we purchased 1,000 at 2 Rand 85. The reason we're recording it exactly at 2 Rand 85 is because we are purchasing, so this is the cost of the purchase. And remember, we are only recording costs in this example. In any inventory system method or inventory valuation method, we do this. So here, your purchases are 1,000 units at 2 Rand 85. You put it into the purchases column, and then there are no issues on this day, so you're going to show this in your balance column. So it's a 1,200 at 2 Rand 75 that you're repeating here. And then you have the newly purchased 1,000 units at 2.58 that's included here. So now you have a balance of 1,200 at 2.75 and 1,000 at 2.85. So the next one is, so we're done now with that purchase on the 13th. We can look at the 18th. So on the 18th, we now had purchased 4,000 units at 2.63. Exactly as it is, we put that into the purchases column. So under purchases on the 18th, you're now going to see 4,000 at 2.63. There are no issues on that day. So into the balance column, you already have the 1,200 at 2.75 and the 1,000 at 2.85. You then need to look at what was newly purchased, which will now be included in our closing balance at the end of that day, and that was the 4,000 at 2.63. Then you have, so we're done with the transaction on the 18th as well. We can now look at the next one. Just want to erase here. Okay, then the next one is that on the 24th, you had sold 5,100 units at 5.41. Again, we are not concerned with those selling prices. We are recording it at its cost. So when it's issued, when it's sold, it is on the first in, first out basis. So 5,100 units. So first thing we need to know is how do we make up the 5,100 units at their respective costs. So you're going to go to the last balance that you had worked with on the previous transaction, and you're going to start taking out from here so that you make up 5,100 units that needs to be sold. So the first thing is the 1,200 at 2.75. You naturally are going to sell off all of those first. So as you can see under the issues column, which indicates everything that is sold at its cost price, it's 1,200 at 2.75. Then you have, so now we're going to do again what I had shown you earlier. You're going to say to make up the 5,100 already, we've taken care of 1,200 items. Now the next one is from the 5,100. We only have managed to cover 1,200. We still are outstanding 3,900 units. So now we need to go to the next set of inventory. So now you can use up or sell off 1,000 units at 2.85. So here, as you can see, again, according to FIFO, it will say then under the issues column that it's 1,000 at 8 rand, sorry, at 2.85. Then the next thing we need to do is look at how much more do we still need. So at the moment, we have 2,200 out of the 5,000 units. We still need a remaining 2,900. Sorry, I'm just trying to make some space here. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so from the 5,100, we only have two. Okay, so from the 5,100, we only have 2,200. We still need to sell off 2,900. So now you're again going to go back to that balance column and you're going to take out the 2,900 from those 4,000 units that are available at 2.63. So as you can see under the issues column, 2,900 at 2.63, and then what you're left with is From that 4,100, from the 4,000 at 263, we used, and the reason I'm saying that that's the end is because we, so yes, sorry, the reason I'm saying is that is that the fact is at the end, whatever was purchased last is going to be there at the end. So from the 4,000 units that was last purchased, we only used up 2,900. And then from that 4,000, we removed the 2,900. Sorry, I'm not sure why I wrote 1,400 here. So from the 4,000, we used up 2,900 and we were left with 1,100. So we then had 1,100 that remained at 2 Rand 63. So I'm going to highlight that as well here. So basically, everything that was purchased first, that came in first, which was the 1,200 at 275, the 1,000 at 285, those were all purchased earlier, purchased first, so they would have been sold off first. The 4,000 units was purchased last, so we only use part of it to make up the 5,100 units. The remainder of it will still be in the business. It'll remain as the balance. So from the 4,000, we took out the 2,900 that was sold and we were left with 1,100. So 1,100 then at the cost of 263 is what will be your closing balance on the 24th. And then on the 30th, we then have the last transaction, which says to us that you had purchased another 1,500 units at 287. So purchases go into the purchases column. So exactly as you saw, 1,500 at 287, and now in your balance column, it will be the 1,100 that was already remaining from the previous transaction. So 1,100 at 263. And you're also going to bring in now the newly purchased 1,500 units at 2 Rand 87. So that's it for your transactions. And this is how you will draw up your table whenever you are asked to draw or to do, the FIFO method or the weighted average method, and they say to you that the company is following a perpetual inventory system, then this is what you will need to do. So as long as it says perpetual inventory system and it says that you are looking at the FIFO method, this is the table that needs to be drawn up. There are marks specifically allocated to it and the values within it. And then you're going to use this table to calculate the rest of the questions. So the first question had said determine the value of your closing inventory. So to determine the value of your closing inventory, all you're going to do is look at the last block in your balance column, and that's your closing balance. It's basically saying that it's the 1,100 units at 2 Rand 63, so times 2 Rand 63 plus it's the 1,500 units at 2 Rand 87 that remains. So this then, and the answer is on the next page, is 7,198. So this is the value of your closing inventory. That's question 1. Question 2 is to determine the sales revenue. So the sales revenue is calculated by taking the selling price per unit and multiplying it by the, so selling price per unit multiplied by the number so selling price per unit, number of units sold. So here for your sales, you're only looking at the items under the transactions, where items were sold. So here on the 8th, we sold 6,000 at 541, and then on the 24th, sold 5,100 also at 541. So all you're going to do is you can say 6,000 times 541 plus 5,100 times 541. Or you could, because they are the same number, the same cost of 5 rand, sorry, the same selling price of 5 rand 41, you could say that it was 6,000 units plus 5,100 units that was sold, all at a value of 5 rand 41. This will give you your cost of sales, which is 60,051. Here's all your answers here on the next page as well. Then the next one asks you to determine the cost of sales for April. So your cost of sales is, remember, and I said this to you earlier, your cost of sales is determined by looking at the issues column. So cost of sales. So all you're going to do is take everything in this column and work it out. So 5,200 at, and you can just write it out like in one row. So 5,200 times 2.5 plus 800 times 2.75 plus 1,200 at 2.75 rand. And the next one is 1,000 at 2.85 rand. The last one is 2,985. The last one is 2,9 at 2.63 rand. Oh, what did I write, y'all? Okay, so that's your cost of sales, and here's the amount for you here as well. Your cost of sales is 28,977. And the last question there had asked you to determine your gross profit. Remember, your gross profit is calculated as sales minus your cost of sales. So here is your sales. It is the 60,051. Your cost of sales is here, the 28,977. So here the profit is 31,074. Okay, so that's the first one, which is your FIFO method under the perpetual inventory system. Now let's look at your weighted average method. I'm just going to give you a 2-minute breather or a 5-minute breather, and then I'll do the weighted average method. Okay, let's continue with the next one. So your weighted average method is actually a lot quicker and simpler, I would say, than the FIFO method. What happens with the weighted average method is that, as I explained earlier, you will find that there's a weighted cost that we need to determine each time a transaction takes place. And then it's just that one cost that is used when items are sold. So let's have a look at it. So it says to you here that we're doing the same things that we had done with the FIFO method. Here we go. We are determining the same values. We're looking at what's the value of your closing inventory, the sales revenue, the cost of sales, the gross profit. So here, same transactions are also being used, which is these ones up here. And we're going to draw up the same table as well. So if you look at the weighted average method, this is the table, the same one we had used for the FIFO method. You have the date, you have the purchases, the issues, and the balance. Again, the same thing applies with your issues column. This is looking at everything that is sold and the cost at which it's sold. So it is your cost of sales. So your cost of sales amount you'll get from here, and then your purchases column is everything that you are buying, any items that are purchased or bought. So let's go ahead and look at the transactions. So the first one is exactly the same. You must record, and please don't forget about this, that they will always mention to you there is some sort of inventory on hand. Sometimes they might say there is no inventory on hand, but do look out for them mentioning that there was stock available or on hand at the beginning of the month. So at the top in that initial paragraph, they said on the 1st of April, there were those 5,200 units that were available with a selling price of 3 Rand. We worked out the cost of that by saying 3 times 100 over 120, and that told us that the cost of it was 2 Rand 50. So again, on the 1st of the month, you'll record that as well, exactly the same way. Date, it doesn't go under purchases or issues because it's just an opening balance. So in the balance column, you'll have 5,200 units at 2 Rand 50 each. Then the next transaction was that you had purchased on the second 2,000 units at 2 Rand 75. So you'll record that under the purchases column as well on the second 2,000 at 2 Rand 75. But the difference now comes in with your balance. So when you're working out your new balance, it's not the same as the FIFO method because what you're going to do is you're going to take the previous balance, which was the 5,200 units, and you're going to say that it was 5,200 units at 2 Rand 50. So 5,200 times 2 Rand 50 plus you're going to add on what was now newly purchased, which was the 2,000 units at 2 Rand 75, and you're going to divide that by the new collective total number of units, meaning there was 5,200 units, you now purchased 2,000, so collectively 52 plus 2,000 gives you 7,200 units that is now collectively available to be sold. So 7,200 units is your denominator. This now gives you the weighted price. So this would give you 2 Rand 57 as your new weighted price. So to record the balance on the second, you now have 7,200 units that are available to be sold at that weighted price of 2 Rand 57. And that's the same thing that you see here in your balance column, 7,200 at 2 Rand 57. So it's exactly the same going forward now. The idea remains the same. The same cost will be used based on what is sold or purchased next. So for instance, the next one says to you that on the 8th, we now had sold 6,000 units. They said this was sold at 5 Rand 41, but we're not concerned with selling prices for these tables. We are recording them at their cost. So 6,000 units are sold. That's in the issues column that's going to go in. So on the 8th, you will show that it was 6,000 units that was sold at that newly calculated weighted price of 2 Rand 57, that same price we had calculated. So there's no need to look at what came in first and start to eliminate them from the top. You will now sell off at that same weighted price that you had calculated. So now you sold off the 6,000 units at that weighted price of 2 Rand 57. So from the 7,200 you had, you sold 6,000, which left you with 1,200 at the 2 Rand 57. So here's your 1,200 at 2 Rand 57. So now we look at the next transaction, and it's going to continue in more or less the same way. So on the 13th, you purchased 1,000 units at 2 Rand 85. So now you're going to go to the purchase column on the 13th, 1,000 at 2 Rand 85. The only thing that's going to change is your balance column, because now in the balance column, all you're going to do is work out a new price, a new weighted price by saying, so we now had 1,200 at 2 Rand 57 and we now purchased 1,000. So we now had 1,200 at 2 Rand 57 and we now purchased 1,000 at 2 Rand 85. So you'll say 1,200 times 2 Rand 57 was there already, plus we purchased 1,000 at 2 Rand 85. You're left with 1,200 plus 1,000. 2,200 units are available. That gives you a new weighted price. So basically, every time you purchase, you would have to calculate a new weighted price. So 2 Rand 70 is your new cost. So you now are sitting with 2,200 units at 2 Rand 70. So here is that here as well in your balance column after that purchase took place, 2,200 at 2 Rand 70. The same now for the next one. On the 18th, you had purchased 4,000 units at 2 Rand 63. So under the purchases column, 4,000 at 2 Rand 63 on the 18th. To calculate a new balance now, you're going to, and again, remember, every time you purchase, it will be a new weighted price that is calculated. So you had 2,200 at 2 Rand 70 that was on hand. You now purchased 4,000 at 2 Rand 63. So collectively, you have 2,000 plus 2,200 plus 4,000. That's 6,200 available. So divide that by 6,200. That gives you a new weighted price of 2 Rand 65. So that's a balance of 6,200 at 2 Rand 65. And that you'll see here as well. Then on the next transaction, we sold. So when we sell, we don't need to work out a new weighted price. It's only when we purchase that we work out a new weighted price. So that sold 5,100 at 5 Rand 41. So you'll go to the issues column because this is where we record anything that's sold. So on the 24th, we sold 5,100 units at that weighted price, that previously calculated weighted price of 265, which came from here. So at 265, you sold 5,100. So from the 6,200 that's available, you sold 5,100. That left you with 1,100 at the 265. So here's 1,000 at 265, and then the last transaction was on the 30th. You purchased more, 1,500 at 287, which means there's a new weighted price that needs to be calculated. So on the 30th, 1,500 at 2.87, and so it'll be whatever was previously there, which was the 1,100 at 265 plus now the newly purchased 1,500 at 2 Rand 87 divided by collectively 1,500 plus 1,100 plus 1,500. That would be 2,600. That gives you a weighted price of 2 Rand 78. So it's the 2,600 units at 2 Rand 78. And that was it for your transactions. You can now answer the questions that they had asked. So the first one was to determine the value of your closing inventory. This at the bottom, whatever's left over on the last day or at the end of the last transaction, will be your value of your closing inventory. So you'll say 2,600 times your 2 Rand 78. That will be the value of your closing inventory. So you can actually work that out as well. Let me just work that out for you. So 7,228 is your value of your closing inventory. Please add that on in your textbooks. I don't think the answer is there. 7,228, yeah. Okay, so this is your value of your closing inventory. Then the next one was they asked you for your sales. So your sales revenue is calculated in the exact same way that we had earlier. 6,000 units were sold at 5 Rand 41 was the selling price, and 5,100 also at 5 Rand 41. So you can say, because they have the same selling price, you can say 6,000 plus 5,100 times the one selling price of 5 Rand 41. Or you can just say that 5 Rand 41. Or you can just say that, and you can do them individually because most of the time they should be different selling prices. So it'll be 6,000 times 5 Rand 41 plus 5,100 times 5 Rand 41. So that'll be the same selling price of 60,051. Here it is here. And then your cost of sales is this column. Remember the issues column. So 6,000 at 2 Rand 57 plus 5,1 at 2 Rand 65. That will give you a cost of sales of 28,935. And the last question, your gross profit, is your sales less your cost of sales. So 60,051 minus the 28,935, and that's 31,116. Okay, so that's your weighted average method under the perpetual inventory system. And then very quickly, let's also, I'm so sorry, I know I'm going over time a bit here. Let's also go through the periodic inventory system. So the periodic inventory system is also quite straightforward. Again, you do need to pay attention to in your exam whether they are saying to you two things. Is it a perpetual or is it a periodic inventory system that the company is using? And the second thing is, am I doing the FIFO or the weighted average method? So here they say to you in example 5.2, we're going to do both the FIFO and the weighted average, but this is where the company is making use of a periodic inventory system. Okay, so here they say to you, Kerr Limited trades in a single homogeneous product. On the 1st of April, there were 5,200 units that were available with the selling price of 3 Rand. This was after they had marked up their goods at 20% on cost. So again, we do need to work out the cost price of that. So to work out the cost price, we take the selling price of 3, multiply it by 100 over 120, and that tells you that your cost price is 2 Rand 50. That's your opening balance, and then here are your transactions. It's more or less the same transactions that we worked with in example 5.1 just now, but obviously the way in which we record them is slightly different. Now, we're going to look at the same calculations of what's the value of the closing inventory, the sales revenue, the cost of sales, and the gross profit for both the FIFO and the weighted average method. We're starting off with the FIFO method, and there are two tables that need to be drawn up for both of these. The exact same tables are drawn for both the FIFO and the weighted average method, so please make note of it. You do need to know how to draw up all of these tables, the ones from question 5.1, as well as the one we're doing at the, sorry, example 5.1 that we did just now, and the example 5.2 that we're working with at the moment. You need to know how to draw up the tables. You will not get a format for it. Remember, there's no exam booklet template that's given to you. So you're getting a blank booklet and you'll have to draw whatever tables are necessary. There's also no formula sheet, remember, so you do need to know pretty much everything here. So the first thing we're drawing up is a table that's going to tell you how many units are available for sale. It says it to you here as well that this is a table that is determining the number of units available for sale. As I said, this table and this table, both these tables, this and this, are drawn up for both the FIFO and the weighted average method if it's a periodic inventory system. Just the way you go about calculating the values differ slightly. Okay, so here the table, as we said, is going to the first one. It's telling us the number of units available for sale. That's calculated by taking your opening inventory, and it says it to you here, plus any purchases that were made. So this table is going to show you everything that we have available and that we purchased that is available to be sold to the final customer. So here you're going to only record your opening balance, which they had said we had calculated on the previous page, was the 5,200 units at 2 Rand 50. So that's on the first, as you can see here, date 5,000. Actually, sorry, before I show you that, let's look at the headings here. It's the date, the number of units, the price of each unit, and then the total value. So this is the same that you will, same headings you'll have in the second table as well. Date, number of units, price, and total value. Back to the first table, you're only recording here any opening inventory and then any purchases that were made. So your opening inventory was the 5,200 units on the first at that price of 2 Rand 50, and this gives you a total. So what you're doing here is saying 52 times 2 Rand 50, it gives you a total of 13,000 Rand. That's the opening inventory. Now let's look at any purchases that were made. So the purchases are going to be everything that I'm highlighting in uh, orange sort of here. So it's this first one that was purchases, that was purchases here, that was a purchase there, and that was a purchase here. So only those ones are going to be recorded at exactly what it says on the page. 2,000 units at 2 Rand 75, 1,000 units at 2 Rand 85, 4,000 at 2 Rand 63, 1,500 at 2 Rand 87. So you can see that here exactly like that as well. 2,000 at 275, 1,000 at 285, 4,000 at 263, 1,500 at 287, 275, 1,000 at 285, 4,000 at 263, 1,500 at 287. And all you're doing is multiplying them. So 2,000 times 275 gave you the 5,500. Then 1,000 times the 2.85 gave you the 2,850. Then 4,000 times 263 gave you 10,520, and 1,500 times 2.87 gave you 4,305. So the ones that are in orange here is your purchases. So these are your purchases, and I'm just going to write that on the side here. And I'd like you to please also write that down in your book. So this is your purchases, that's your opening inventory. The purchases amount to 28,997, sorry, 977. And your opening inventory was at 13,000. So, as I said, this table is showing you everything that is available for sale. So the opening inventory is 13,000. Your purchases was the 28,977. And collectively, as you can see here now, and I'm just going to change the color back to blue, you have 13,700 units that are available for sale, which is a sum of all of these opening inventory plus your purchases. And then your total worth of the inventory that's available for sale is 36,175, which again is just adding up everything in this last column. Okay, so that is your, let me just remove all this. This is your first table that's drawn up. Then the second table is going to be your sales. So it's everything that's going to be sold from this page. So I'm just going to highlight this in purple. So this that was sold and that was sold is going to now be recorded. So you're going to have 6,000 units at 5 Rand 41 and 5,100 units also at 5 Rand 41. So here you can see exactly the same thing, 6,000 at 5 Rand 41, 5,100 at 5 Rand 41. Again, all you're doing is multiplying. So 6,000 times 5 Rand 41 gave you the 32,460, and then 51 times 541 gave you the 27,591. So you're done with your sales. Collectively, this says to you that 11,100 units, which is the sum of those two, is sold in that period, and this is the sales revenue. It's summing up those two. So those are your two tables. Now you're going to start working out the values that they had asked you to determine. So the first one they had asked you to calculate was your value of your closing inventory. Here it is here, number one. So we are working with the FIFO method first. So let's look at how to calculate the value of your closing inventory under the FIFO method. So under the FIFO method, to work out the value of your closing inventory, the first thing you're going to do is determine how many units are not sold, how many units are remaining as your closing inventory. So 13,700 was available to be sold, and we sold 11,100. So what is left in your closing inventory is 2,600 units. That's the same thing that it says here. Now to determine the worth of those 2,600 units, we need to look at the fact that we're working with the FIFO method. So under the FIFO method, remember they say to you that what is there first will be sold off first. So what is there or purchased last will remain as your closing inventory. So basically, to make up the 2,600 units that are left at the end of a period, we're not going to start at the top because those will be sold first. We're going to rather start at the bottom because these are the units that would have still remained because they were bought later, so they will be sold later. So these are more likely to be the items that are still remaining as the closing inventory. So to make up the 2,600 units, we start at the bottom on the last day that they gave to you. So this was 1,500 units at 2 Rand 87. So we'll say that to make up the 2,600, it's 1,500 units at 2 Rand 87. But we still need to make up 2,600 units, 1,100 more. That's 1,000. Sorry, let me just show you that. So from the 2,600, we already accounted for 1,500, but that still leaves us with 1,100 that we need to account for. So from the next one now, we already took care of all that. We now have to go to the next one, or basically the previous one here. So 1,100 units will be taken out from here, and it's at 2 Rand 63. So now we have the worth of your closing inventory. It's 1,500 at 2 Rand 87 plus the 1,100 at 2 Rand 63. And that is the value of your closing inventory under the 500 at 2 Rand 63. And that is the value of your closing inventory under the FIFO method. So now we're done with your value of your closing inventory. That's question 1. Let's look at question 2. Question 2 is to determine the sales revenue, but we actually already did that in this table, so we don't need to calculate that. It was a 60,051, so we can skip that one. The next one is your cost of sales. Now, your cost of sales is going to be calculated here using a formula that we saw in Learning Unit 2. There's two ways to calculate it. The easier is the one we saw in Learning Unit 2, a formula we came across in Learning Unit 2. So if you go to Learning Unit 2 in your textbook, you will see the following formula. The one that I'm highlighting up here, it says to calculate your cost of sales, you will take your opening inventory, add on your purchases, and subtract your closing inventory, and this will give you your cost of sales. So your opening inventory is this item that I had pointed out to you here, the 13,000. It says to you then add on your purchases. Your purchases, I said to you, was this 28,977, and subtract your closing inventory, which we just calculated at the bottom here now, was 7,198. And that would give you your cost of sales, which is 20. Sorry, I actually gave you the wrong value here. Now that I'm seeing it, this one here, your purchases was actually 23,175. So these added up give the ones in orange added up gives you your purchases, which is 23,175. The total of your cost of sales is the 28,977. Okay, so that's one way, the easiest way to calculate your cost of sales. The alternate way that you can calculate it is, and I'm just going to erase some stuff here. Just going to erase this so that it doesn't become too much for you to see. Okay. Okay, I just want to write this and then I'll explain this. Okay, so an alternate method to calculating your cost of sales would be a longer way, but if you feel more comfortable with doing it this way, that's perfectly fine as well. Remember we said that at the bottom here, we said that 2,600 units were not sold because this was a total available to sell. This is how much we did sell, 11,100. So 2,600 units were not sold. That's your value of your closing inventory. So if 2,600 were not sold, that means that everything else here was sold. So 5,200 units at 2 Rand 50 was sold, 2,000 units at 2 Rand 75 was sold, 1,000 units at 2 Rand 85 was sold. And here, from this last one, 4,000 units was what was available to be sold, but we had 1,100 that was not sold. Remember, we did this calculation on the side, which means from this 2,900 was actually sold. So 2,900 at 2 Rand 63 was sold. So you can do that actual calculation. You can say 5,200 times 2 Rand 50 plus 2,000 units times 2 Rand 75 plus 1,000 units at 2 Rand 85 plus now that remaining 2,900 that had been sold at 2 Rand 63. And that will give you the same answer of 28,977, but it's whichever method you prefer. You can use the one at the top here, or you can use this method, whichever you prefer. They both will give you the same answer. And then your gross profit, the last one here, is going to be your sales minus cost of sales. So your sales is the 60,051 that you calculated in this table. And your cost of sales we just calculated was 28,977. And so that would give you a gross profit of 31,074. Okay, so that's your FIFO of 31,074. Okay, so that's your FIFO method under the periodic inventory system. And then the last one is the weighted average method under the periodic inventory system. So the same exact tables are drawn up, exactly the same table as here, exactly the same table as here. So if you're doing the weighted average method for the periodic inventory system, you'll do exactly the same table first, which is the number of units that are available for sale. You'll put in the opening inventory, which was the 5,200 at 2 Rand 50. That gave you 13,000. And then you added on all of the purchases. So your purchases were all of these ones here. Then you have total purchases. This is the number of units available to sell. This is the total worth of them. And then your sales, you recorded them. This is the total number of units sold. This is the actual sales revenue. So now that you have that, your first question, which was to determine the value of your closing inventory. How you'll calculate that is the first thing you'll do is you will take your total worth of your inventory, 36,175, divided by the number of units available to sell, 13,700, and that's going to give you your weighted price. That's 2 Rand 64. We calculate a weighted price because under the weighted average method, that's how it would work. So this 2 Rand 64 is now going to be used to determine the value of your closing inventory. So your value of your closing inventory is going to be 13,700 units available to sell. Of that, we sold 11,100. So there's 2,600 units available at the end or that remain in your inventory, your value of your closing inventory, but the worth of it is the 2,600 times that weighted price that we just calculated of 2 Rand 64. So 2,600 times 2 Rand 64, and it's all here as well. So the average or the weighted average price is 264. There's 2,600 units available, so 26 times 264 tells you your value of your closing inventory is 6,864. So that's question one done, your value of your closing inventory. It's the 2,600 units at 2 Rand 64, which is worth 6,864. Then the second question, which is your sales, was already done. Here's it here in the table, the 60,051, so you don't need to calculate that. Then your cost of sales in number 3 is pretty straightforward under the weighted average method. You're saying that 11,100 units are sold. We want to know the cost of it. So you're going to say 11,100, your cost of sales is calculated by saying 11,100 times that average price that you calculated of 2 Rand 64. So that tells you that your cost of sales is 29,304. And then your last question, which is your gross profit, is your sales. So it is the 60,051 as your sales minus your cost of sales of 29,304. Here's it here as well. 60,051 minus 29,304. Your gross profit is 30,747. All right, so that's it for your inventory valuation methods. Please make note of, go through again this question, the templates, the tables that need to be drawn up, how they differ under the periodic inventory system and the perpetual inventory system. Try out, there is, I think, another example question 5.1, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe question 5.2, but there are other examples of this in your textbook, so please do try those out. As I said, you will need to know the difference between them and how to draw up the different tables, because you don't get a format of this in your exam. There is no template or booklet that has tables drawn up for you already, so you do need to know how to draw up those tables. So please make note of it, and please go through the example, because there are differences between your periodic inventory system and perpetual inventory system, and there's also differences for each of the FIFO and the weighted average under each method as well. So please make sure to go through another example of this, and also listen in on this recording again if you need to ahead of the exam, so that you're comfortable with either one of them being asked. In a typical exam question, they're not going to ask you all 4 of them. They'll probably only ask you 1 out of the 4 generally. That's how it works. So you do need to know all 4, but it's important that you know exactly which one is which. So you need to know, if they're asking me weighted average method under the periodic inventory system, the one at the bottom here is the one you'll need to know. So this one that we just worked with here. So basically you'd have to draw up these 2 tables and then do that method that I also put the bracket around here. Or if they're saying FIFO method under the perpetual inventory system, then it's the very first table that was drawn up, and we can get most of what we need from here. Or if we need the weighted average method under perpetual, this is the table we'll draw up, where we need to calculate a new weighted price every time a purchase is made. Or if it is the periodic under the the periodic inventory system with the FIFO method, then it's these 2 tables and the calculations that we did here and here on the next page. All right, so that's it. Thank you, everyone. I will chat to you again soon. I'll let you know when I am uploading another recording. Please make sure to go through this and the other example in your textbook, and I'll chat to you again soon.